Good evening. This is DTV, as we are here to uh, help with the values of the Democratic Party and the interests of the Democratic Party. I'm Tony Brown, your host, producer tonight. And this evening, we have two lovely guests. We have Reverend Middlebrook, Harold Middlebrook. Everyone knows him very well. He's one of the gems of the community. We also have Reverend Kesler, Renee Kesler. Everyone knows her. She's the director and CEO of Beck's Cultural Center. It is probably the only one of its kind in the country. It's by far the best thing anywhere in the Southeast. And if your kids hadn't seen it, you need to take them there. And if you've got students, it's a good place for a daycare, for a field trip. It's just one of a kind. And it's a really wonderful place. Now, the Democratic Party is we're all having an election on May 1st. And I want to remind you that you can get your information from knoxcounty.org, or you can go to the Democrats, knoxville.org, I believe it is, right, for the Democratic Party's website. You can call the office at 540-4001. There'll be rides to the elections. You got questions about who's voting, who's running. You got questions about, can I get a button? Can I get a yard sign? Hey, call the office. And if you got a question about any of these things concerning this political election coming up, call the Democratic office. And please remember to vote. It's so important. Everybody says, well, it doesn't. It does matter. It does matter. And I know things sometimes not right, but that's why everybody needs to get out there and vote, okay? People holler about this problem, holler about that problem. That's how you make yourself be heard. You don't have to have money. You don't have to have a car. You just need to be able to vote. And if you lost your voting rights at some point, we can fix that too. It just takes a little bit longer, okay? Now, this evening, we're here with Dr. Middlebrook. Dr. Middlebrook has done so many things. He has, I think he was on the board for the Martin Luther King Commission when they started it. You helped start it yourself, did you not?
Yes.
And then there's a senior complex over there in East Knoxville that you founded.
Well, we started Golden Age Retirement Village. And as a comparable part of that, realizing the next stage, we received a certificate of need to build a skilled and intermediate care nursing home, which is now hosting health care. Mm-hmm. And so we've just tried to serve the community. Let me just make one correction.
Yes.
You said I was the jam. This is the diamond of the community.
Okay.
He clearly has a wonderful wife.
Yes, he does.
She has done very well with
Yes. That's the way to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think we've been involved, Renee has, in most all of the progressive movements that have gone on in this community and trying to bring people together at least since 1977. Yeah.
Well, it's I think everybody that matures should get to the point where, like, what can I do? What have I done to make the community just a little bit better? You know, something. There's many different ways to make it better, many different ways to help people. I think as a Christian, that's your job to help people in the first place. I remember we were doing a Bible study, and they said the book of Nehemiah, and they said, but we're doing everything. We're doing all the sacrifice. Said, no, you're not seeking justice for all the people. Not just those people over there, not just people in your church, but all people. As a Christian, that is your job. That's your position. Yeah. And God knows there's a whole lot of inequalities and stuff going on. People get messed up, people in trouble, Medicare and Medicaid, blah, blah, blah. So there's many ways to people, food, medical attention. There's just many, many ways. So I think, like the Sisters of the Love Kitchen, when they did that thing, they were nurses, and they turned around and just feeding the people. That was a great thing. Yeah. You know, that guy that does that free medical clinic on Magnolia, if that's still where it is, Dr. Kung or whatever his name is, that's a very good thing. We want to make the world a little bit better place, and I think Knoxville is a wonderful city. I heard someone say the other day they thought it was a place just for old folks. I said, no. Knoxville is a place for people. There's a lot of places to go to, and it's a wonderful place to raise kids, and it has its problems like any place else, but we are working on them, and I think it's a wonderful place to raise your family. And we have good education. Now we live in a state where every kid can go to college for 2 years free. And I was lucky. Last May, we're getting ready to get to the graduation time again. Last May, I was invited to come speak to the students the night after they graduated, and I was so glad because a woman stood up there and told the kids they didn't need to get an education. I was about to choke, and I said, no. You do need an education, and now you're blessed to live in a state where you can get at least 2 years college, every last one of you, okay, and then try real hard to get that last 2. And so it just worked it out that God had me there, and I was supposed to do the prayers, and I did the prayers, and then I did that too. But anyway, all these kids are our future, and I'm really, really, really touched by this latest thing on the gun laws where the students have stood up and said, we're not taking this anymore, and we're going to put it up on ourselves, and we're going to do something about this. And I was at a commissioners meeting a few weeks ago, and there was a girl here in Knoxville said the same thing, stood up there. And I told her, I said, well, you need to get in touch with the party. You need to get something. You need to go to Facebook. You need a webpage and get all these people together.
Well, I think you need to know, though, that a few weeks ago in this community, at the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Church, young people did hold a speak out.
Right.
They packed the place out.
Yes.
And young people who were out of that church and other communities did. I think one of the other things we need to point out, though, as we talk about this community, we need to talk about the service that Beck renders also.
Oh, yeah.
Because Beck is the repository
Yes.
of our history. And, people discover how much they don't know when they go to Beck.
That's true.
About
That's true.
Knoxville. I've been fortunate. When I came here 41 years ago, people said that I was an outsider. And I kept saying to people, for African Americans, there is no outsider. All of us were, all of us were basically. And so, and I said to some people then that I'm more of an insider than you because I can go to some places that you can't go because I'm bold enough to go. And I think that Knoxville has come over the last 40 years that I've seen. Knoxville has come a long way. Now, that does not mean we can rest on our laurels. The thing that we're looking at doing as we look at this celebration week coming up, it is unique. It is unique. I'm convinced that God has a real divine sense of humor. When Dr. King was killed, we were moving toward Easter. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary, it's right after Easter, Resurrection Sunday, and then 3 days later, we're talking about the assassination. And so I think that it is a way that we are being reminded that there is resurrection and there is salvation and good, even out of evil. It's always interesting to me that when people talk about Good Friday, and somebody said, well, what's so good about that Friday on which Christ was killed? But the fact that liberation could take place. And so here we are centuries later. Martin is killed. They're all moving around the same time frame. And it says to us that, again, liberation can take place. We must remember that when Martin came to Memphis, let me give you just a little history. When the sanitation workers came out on strike, we did not really know they were coming out.
Okay.
We knew that men had been killed on trucks, and they gave the family $500 for the funeral. The city.
Okay.
They were killed in action. We African American men. We knew that on a rainy day, when the men reported to work, they hung around in the barn for 2 hours. For the African American men who actually lifted the garbage cans and all from the back of the house. We didn't have the roll-out garbage cans that you roll to the street. Men literally had to go to the back of the house and lift 50-gallon drums, some of them, or whatever the people had their garbage in. They emptied into tubs, and they would put those tubs on their head, bring them out to the truck. And many instances, slime and water and all was running down on those men's faces.
Ooh.
If it rained, the white supervisor got paid for the day. The African American garbage man could hang around for 2 hours. If it kept raining, they were sent home. They didn't get paid anything for that day. There were no real benefits for those workers. So when the workers went out on strike, it was their decision. We had Roy Wilkins, Bayard Rustin, a number of key leaders who came into Memphis to speak to the sanitation workers. And we were trying to encourage them. We suggested that Dr. King come. He was really busy trying to get the Poor People's Campaign organized. Jim Lawson and H. Ralph Jackson and Jesse Epps called Dr. King to try to persuade him. I called Daddy King.
Okay.
Because that was my man.
Okay.
And asked him to persuade Martin to come to Memphis for one purpose, and that was to speak one night to encourage the men. Strange thing happened, Renee. While Dr. King was up speaking, a couple of people went to Dr. Abernathy and said to Dr. Abernathy, it would be good if Martin led a march tonight. So when Dr. King finishes speaking, Reverend Abernathy gets up and says, you know, Dr. King, it would be good for us to lead a march down to the jail. And Dr. King said, no, not tonight. We've got to be in Marks, Mississippi in the morning, but I'm coming back to lead a march. We set a date.
Okay.
The date that he was scheduled to come back, it snowed snowballs. It started raining, then it started sleeting, and then literal snowballs started falling. We were working, putting together signs. And when we came out of the church, out of Claiborne Temple, our cars were covered. We couldn't move our cars. No trains could get in, no planes or buses could get in. Dr. King tried to come in for a symbolic march, couldn't. And then we set another date. He comes back in. That march, of course, turns to violence. So now, and we now know that there were people planted in the march. A good book to read if you want some real background is to look at the book At the River I Stand by Joan Bifus.
At the River I Stand.
The River I Stand. There is also a documentary that is done at the River I Stand that was done by the University of Memphis and then published by the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, that is shown periodically during this time. But Dr. King came back because if he could not lead a nonviolent march in Memphis, then the question would be, could he lead a nonviolent campaign marching through the South to Washington, D.C.? And so, you know, we knew, we were hurt that Dr. King was killed. But we had lived in anticipation for years. In 1964-65, there was a rumor out in St. Augustine, Florida, that there was a bounty out on the head of Martin Luther King. And so you always anticipated. We had become accustomed to Medgar Evers and to Schwerner Goodman and Cheney and to a number of people being killed. One young lady who had been in the sit-ins with us in Atlanta Ruby Doris Smith was with SNCC, and she went over into South Carolina and got killed. They came raid on the campus and killed her. She's buried in Rock Hill. And so we anticipated that coming. And I don't want to take the time, but I'm merely saying that here is the setting
For what happened?
around the motel. Around the motel when Dr. King was back were African American police officers who were the security. Across the street at the fire hall, Lieutenant Reddick, a black police officer, was stationed there with binoculars to keep a record of who was coming and going in Dr. King's room. There were 2 black firemen, African American firemen, assigned to that station. They worked 24-hour shifts. As one went off, another one came on. Floyd Newsom was one of those. The day before his assassination, a shift takes place. All of the African American police officers were removed from providing the security at the motel, and only European American white police officers were assigned. On the night before the assassination, the black fireman who was on duty was switched to another station, and the fireman who was scheduled to come in the next day was called and told to report to another station. On the day of the assassination, Reddick gets a call to report to the chief's office. He sits in the chief's office 3 or 4 hours, just sitting there. And the chief comes out and says, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I was called or told to report here." Nobody knows who told him to report there. And he's told, "Go back to the motel." But by the time he gets back to the motel,
It's already happened.
it's already happened. And so all I say to you is that there are so many events that happened on that day and on that night. The night before, at our April the 3rd celebration that's going to take place here, they're going to use Dr. King's last speech. Well, that night on April 3rd, it was an interesting event. It was storming. There were tornado warnings out. So the crowd was not as large as usual. Dr. King was feeling haggard and tired, and he was going through his Garden of Gethsemane experience. And he did not come initially to Mason Temple to speak. They sent Dr. Abernathy. Dr. Abernathy looks at the crowd, and he calls the motel. He said to me, we were sitting on the platform, "I need to find a payphone." We didn't know nothing, Renee, about you weren't born then. We didn't know nothing about cell phones, but he says, "I need to find a phone." So we went out into the lobby, found a payphone, and Dr. Abernathy calls Dr. King and says, "You need to come speak to this crowd. This ain't my crowd. They didn't come to hear me." Because when we came in with Dr. Abernathy, the faces of the crowd kept looking for Dr. King, and when they didn't see him, you could see the despondency on the faces. He's not coming. And so we had to send for Dr. King. He came in looking haggard and tired and just out of it. It's tornado warnings. You can hear the thunder. You can hear. And Dr. Abernathy says, "You know, sometimes we get in too big a hurry to introduce people who've been with us, great leaders." He says, "But tonight, it's a tornado warning, and y'all can't go nowhere nohow." So I'm going to tell you, he took 30-some minutes to introduce Dr. King. And then Dr. King gets up and speaks for 48 minutes. In that book and in a book, Redeeming the Soul of America, the Story of SCLC by Adam Fairclough, they quote me as saying, he has used every closing that we've ever heard him use. And when he finished and was sitting down, we could see the tears welling up in his eyes. You know, he talked about, we were talking about that a little earlier, Dr. E.V. Davidson, who was here, was then an intern in New York.
Yes.
And he was taking care of Dr. King when Dr. King got stabbed.
1958.
And he said, they asked him what was the prognosis, and Dr. Davidson said, if he had sneezed, he would have died. Dr. King said that night, and the little girl from upstate New York wrote and said, I'm glad you didn't sneeze. And Dr. King said, I'm glad I didn't sneeze because I would have missed the sit-ins of the 60s. And I would have missed Selma. And he just went through a litany. And then he closed with, and I would have missed seeing these bold sanitation men. And then he kept talking about, I've been to the mountaintop. And so there were a number of events, and I've gone through this litany merely because I'm convinced that it was a divine providential thing that happened. It was no accident.
God's always in charge. There's always a plan.
And that we could then look at liberation, not just liberation for African Americans, but liberation for white women, liberation for poor white folk, period, in Appalachia and all over. That we could look for liberation for Hispanic people. The killing of Martin King was a liberating force for all people.
Yes,
and it was to fulfill what SCLC's theme was, redeeming the soul of America. Those were the events around the actual assassination.
It's just so amazing to hear all this from somebody that was there, because 90% of what you just said, I've never heard before.
Well, it's interesting. There was a fellow named Ben Branch. Ben Branch was the director of the Operation Breadbasket Band. Ben was originally from Memphis, but he moved his whole band to Chicago and became the Breadbasket Band for SCLC.
Okay.
He showed up, and Jesse said, Dr. King, look who's here. And Dr. King said, Brother Ben, what are you doing here? And Ben Branch said, the whole band is here. We're going to play for the mass meeting tomorrow night. And Dr. King, leaning over that balcony, said, I want you to play Precious Lord, and I want you to play it real pretty. And he stood up, and we heard the bang, and he was no more.
Wow. Well, Reverend Kesler, I'm sorry, trying to get back to you. You're currently the president and CEO of Beck's Cultural Center, Exchange Center. Beck was established around 1975 as I was coming out of high school. And it is a storehouse of African American culture and Black history. And you graduated from Knoxville, UT, and the leadership chancellor's thing through UT. Explain what that was.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. And go ahead.
No, I'm so.
And then you did a DBE. And
you don't have to do it.
Okay, and all that. Okay. So anyway.
It doesn't matter. I sit here and listen to Pastor Middlebrook, and I'm in awe. As you mentioned, Brother Brown, thank you for allowing me to be here and for having the opportunity to just be with you guys. And it's always a privilege and an honor for me to sit next to Dr. Middlebrook and to hear him recount the stories. And I'm grateful for the work that the Democratic Television is doing to ensure this kind of information gets out. And while Beck is no relation or affiliation to any party, we certainly are advocates for justice and equality and promoting African American history and culture within this region. And to your point, the thing that makes Beck unique is of all African American history and culture centers in this country, Beck really specializes in local African American history and culture and regional. So absent of Beck, there's no single African American history or culture center doing what we do in this region. And specifically why that's important, I think, in relationship to this significant milestone that we're approaching as this 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King approaches. We connect Dr. King to his roots here in Knoxville, and that's kind of what we do with all African Americans who come this way. You know, once you come this way, we adopt you and you become family. And so we certainly have adopted our godson, Dr. King. So many people affiliated with him. Dr. King came here. Of course, he was at the Highlander Center. He was here at Knoxville College as a commencement speaker at the Knoxville College campus. And then just having Dr. Middlebrook here, who had that very personal relationship with Dr. King and the King family, and having him here is a great connection. And then, of course, with Mr. Avon Rollins, my predecessor, who was the former director of the Beck Cultural Exchange Center, who transitioned December of 2016. But he always told me, you know, tremendous stories about his relationship with the movement. And the movement is, you know, it humbles me to even call Dr. King's name. I was telling Pastor Middlebrook as we were looking at some of the pictures that you're flashing throughout the show, some of those great photographs. I said to him, I wasn't there, obviously, but I can't look at those pictures without becoming extremely emotional.
I know.
And there's a part of all of us that connect with those pictures, whether we were there or not. Even those of us who were coming along in life, and we're reading the stories of who Dr. King was and who the movement was. And here's what I know. I listen to Dr. King's speeches. Many of them I can recite because I love them. Every year I change which one's my favorite. It depends on where I am in my life as to which one's my favorite. But the thing I love about recounting this anniversary and the assassination is the movement was bigger than Dr. King. He knew it, and he was very clear to say that this was a movement, and it wasn't about him. I think Dr. King would be the first one to tell you this had no way, this could have never been possible without the people involved. And so while we attribute much of the movement to Dr. King, I think Dr. King himself would say to great people who surrounded him, allowed him to be the face and the voice, and certainly he was a tremendous worker in the movement, but it was a movement of people.
Yes.
And I think I really love about the movement of people, and Dr. King is so humble, I know this is who he is it was always a movement of young people. Even today, when we look at all the great movements, Dr. King is smiling because it's still a movement of young people. They're inciting the next generation to get involved. And I think you mentioned that as you opened the show about the young people getting involved. Whenever there's an injustice or an inequality, it's always been young people that have had this fire, right? This passion. And then they had alongside them some of our elders to kind of cultivate them and to groom them. But it's been them that's been doing it. And I think Dr. King would say that as well. And then finally, just to prove my point, that I believe that that's what Dr. King would say. Again, today, one of my favorite sermons he talked about is that, you know, he did his own funeral speech, right? And he said, if you happen to be around on that day, you know, don't say a long sermon. He said, tell the preacher don't preach for a long time. He went on to say, don't say of Dr. King that he won all of these awards, the Nobel Peace Prizes, hundreds of awards. That's not important. He said, don't say of Martin that, you know, he had all these titles and accolades behind his name. That's not important. He said, if you happen to be around on that day, he said, I want somebody to say that Martin did live his life trying to help somebody. That Martin lived his life trying to serve. He said, that's what I want you to say on that day, is that I did feed those who were hungry, that I did provide clothing to those who didn't have clothing, I did visit the prisons, that I did my best trying to serve someone else. And I think that if we miss that part of King, the part where he was the servant, humble servant leader, then we're going to miss some of the best parts about him, because it's that servant leadership that propelled him to all these other areas of economic, of justice, of equality, because it was something that was bigger than self.
I think
I was a drum major for justice.
I was a drum major for justice.
A drum major for justice.
all the leadership positions that the definition of a leader is you're a servant to everybody else. Yeah. Everybody thinks like, well, that person wants to be the big shot, that person wants to do this, that person likes to hear himself talk. No, you're serving everyone else, and you're working twice as hard just because it's something that needs to be done that you believe in. So it's instrumental. Everybody just loved him to death. They still love him to death. I am so tickled that we got to do this. I
want to contradict that.
Okay.
Everybody did not love Martin.
Well, yeah.
When Dr. King came to Knoxville College to speak,
okay,
people tried to run Dr. Colston away from the college for bringing Martin King to speak here.
Really?
And I see all of these people now who tell me they were part of the movement and how they loved King. But Dr. King caught as much hell from our own community as he did from the white community. And so I think it's important for us to realize that we idolize him today. If we aren't careful, we'll sanitize Martin and make him at holy idol. But Martin was an agitator.
Say that.
Martin was a confronter. And Martin caused people. You know, one of the interesting things that I look back and remember, Renee, is we were sitting in Danville, Virginia. This really hit me. And all of the staff was sitting in the home of Harris Slade. And we were just having a discussion that night. And Dr. King went around the room and he asked, "Who are you?" And people started telling him where they were born, where they were. And he got to C.T. Vivian, and C.T. Vivian started talking. And he said to C.T., "I know I should have made you last," because C.T. never talked about his educational background. C.T. talked about, "I am a child of God, created in," and one of the things that I liked about Dr. King, and that I learned from him, is that Dr. King could throw out an issue and start a discussion in the room. And then he would sit back quietly and listen to everybody. And when he went out to make his speech, you said, "That's Andy. No, that's Bevel. No, that's White. No." And you could find some of yourself and some of people in his speeches. Because he really, remember that on 1 year to the day before his death, he made a speech in New York. And he talks about the three giants: racism, militarism, and materialism. He was a prophet, because if you look at where we are now, those three same giants are causing this: militarism, racism, materialism, sexism. I mean, you could go on and on with the isms. And Martin predicted he was the prophet. And so it is important, I think, for us to realize, as we look back on his life, people just called him a preacher. Martin was really not the preacher. His brother A.D. was the preacher. Martin was the theologian, the philosopher, the leader. And he led by speaking the desires and the aspirations of people who were depressed. And that's why when he came to Memphis with the sanitation workers, the sanitation strike became, at first, the launching pad for the Poor People's Campaign was Marks, Mississippi, which was the poorest county in the United States at that time.
Okay.
But it shifted because now the sanitation workers, those who were at the bottom of the rung economically, were now standing up. That became the Poor People's Campaign. And that struggle did not end with his death. There is still a campaign around poor people and their needs.
Wow, wow. And, you know, we want the kids to, we had the Martin Luther King parade every year, which is, I think is great. And you served on the commission. And you helped found the commission. You were on the first commission, right?
I called together. I don't want to take any credit for it, but when I came here, there were a bunch of little small King celebrations.
Okay.
The YWCA, the YMCA, the Alphas, the Ministers, everybody, Knoxville College, UT students. And so what we tried to do, we asked Bob Booker to participate, and Dewey, Gloria Garner. We had a meeting at the chamber, and my only question was, is there a way that we can show to this community that Martin King was not divided and separated and creating this, that he was a whole? Is there a way that we can have a celebration where all of us come together? And the people took it from there. And we formed the Martin Luther King Commission, and you know, Renee became a chair. But people said to me, but this is just no. This is the people's celebration. And any cause that's going to succeed has to be greater than a personality. The cause has to always be greater. And so I'm delighted. I rejoice every year when I see the King celebration growing and people participating. I just hope one thing, that parents will start insisting that when their children do participate in the parade, that's what it's become now. Number one, that they come into the service and hear
that service is fantastic.
What's being said, number one. Number two, that our city and our county would push that the bands of the schools participate. It ought not be just Austinese. There needs to be a Fulton, there needs to be a Central, there needs to be a Farragut and a Bearden participating.
Well, even UT was in there a few years ago when Theotis came and spoke, and I guess was the chancellor of UT at the time when Theotis actually was admitted. But the UT band was there that time in the parade, remember?
They've been in the parade several times throughout the years. Much of it has to do with their scheduling. So that one's a little more difficult.
Okay.
Because one of the things that happens is after the SEC tournaments and all in football, based on how far UT goes. After that, the marching band.
They're still in season.
Is in season.
So it's hard
or they go to Washington for the inauguration or for something. So you really have to work around their schedule. There's nothing though that keeps our high school bands from participating. One year we asked one of the high school bands about participating, and they said, "Oh, we have something planned for the children on that day." And I said to him, "You're a liar and a racist," because schools are out. Now, Renee would have been very suave and diplomatic. I'm just to the point, because there's nothing happening at any of our schools on Martin Luther King Day.
That's true.
And
they're all closed.
They're closed. So there's nothing that says that our children can't come. but I think that we do have to keep. I was amazed, though, and this is something that I've been thinking about. I know we don't have but a couple more minutes. Renee, I saw an article, the editor at the New Sentinel, Jack McElroy, wrote an article this year in January that said, what if we made Martin Luther King Day nationally April the 4th instead of January 15th? You know, and I recognize when we were fighting for January 15th, we were fighting because that was his birthday. But you know, what would happen if April the 4th, the day of liberation, became really a major day in this country, because schools are not out on April 4th. People don't. I talked to some people yesterday, and they said, "Oh, you know, I just thought about it when you said it, that April the 4th is coming up."
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, let me help you with that. How about we celebrate the birth of the Liberator, January 15th, or the third Monday, and we have a second day at the Liberation. April 4th. We don't have to give up anything.
That sounds good.
Yeah, but I think that we have to keep remembering
It is a significant.
that April 4th
It's significant.
is significant. And that's why on April the 3rd in Knoxville, there's going to be a celebration at 6 o'clock at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, pulled together by the Martin Luther King Commission and KICMA, the Knoxville ministers, and others.
The 50 plus, don't forget, with Reverend Gibson.
Yeah, because Gordon Gibson and a number of others have been involved in having discussions all this year around the 50 plus celebration, and we're trying to culminate it with this celebration. It's going to be a real celebration. That night, beginning at 6, Dr. King's last speech at Mason Temple, the mountaintop speech, will be played. The Knox Opera Gospel Choir will be rendering some music. And a young man out of this community, William Terry Ladd, the son of Umoja Adul, is going to come back from Chattanooga. He's completed all of the requirements for his doctorate, passed his dissertation and everything. So
fantastic.
He's coming back to the community to be the speaker that
Dr.
night.
Ladd.
He will be Dr. Ladd. And but we brought him here a few years ago. He's one of our sons.
Emancipation.
Yeah, we brought him here for the Emancipation Day about 5 years ago. And he is articulate, he's sharp, and he's going to talk about where we were then, where are we now, and how do we go forward. I think people will want to be there, and they'll want to bring their young people. And then there's another celebration coming up as a part of that 50th. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, Renee.
Sure. I wanted to, that Culture Exchange Center, in partnership with the Tennessee Theater and the Knoxville Area Urban League, in addition to supporting this event that Pastor just talked about, will be partnering to host a free event on Sunday, April the 15th. And this is in recognition, of course, of the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King, and it will be the 55th anniversary of the desegregation of the Tennessee Theater. And so we're going to be viewing, the event's going to be viewing To Kill a Mockingbird, that screening of that film. But we're also going to have a civil rights panel discussion just before the actual screening that we'll be doing leading up to that. But having this conversation, sort of to your point, and to Dr. Middlebrook's point about where we are now. And so what real courage is. Right? Having this conversation about what real courage is. So we're excited about that. But, I think just around this whole conversation in general, and I think you may have said this, Brown, before, earlier on, I always ask myself, what will be our legacy? Right? Each of us. I love when you mentioned C.T. Vivian, because he is certainly one of my favorites. And C.T. Vivian came here many years ago, and he said he never talks about the civil rights movement, right? He says, I've been beat, I've been spit on, these things have happened to me, all these things have done. He said, and he never talks about the movement. He said, I think at that time he was 92 years old. He said, I'm 92 years old, and if I'm still talking about the movement, I didn't move. He said, I still am doing work, and he has this mentoring program in Atlanta. He's doing young people. That blessed my heart, because what it said to all of us, especially those of us that are in the Moses phase, right? 80 years, he started at 80 years old. So first of all, on that end of the scale, there is still work to be done, and we should not be resting on our laurels, as Pastor said, of 50 years ago, what we're doing. If we're still taunting what happened 50 years ago, and we're not talking about what we're doing today to make a difference in this community, then we've missed it. This is C.T. Vivian talking. And Renee Kesler, as a person from a different generation, you know, what am I doing? What are we doing that's make a difference? I love how James Baldwin says it. He says, if you're not afraid to look back, then nothing you're facing can frighten you, right? So I love to look back and to look at all of those things that Dr. King, Dr. Middlebrook, all these amazing people did, and that's wonderful. But that's not enough, right? The work is too great, and there's still too much to be doing. So I think everybody has a call, and I think this is what Dr. King would say. I think this is what we should be doing as we're commemorating the 50 year, is not just revisiting yesterday for the sake of paying homage to yesterday, but what did we learn from yesterday, 50 years ago? And what are we doing today to ensure, A, we don't repeat some of those eras of yesterday? And then what are some of those dynamic, wonderful, great things that happened yesterday that we've forgotten to carry forward today and to keep doing? Because that's why history is so important. History is the great truth teller. It's the great equalizer. So as we study history, as we learn history, as we begin to revisit history, I think it's important that we do so for truth's sake. What's the truth? Because history is truth. Doesn't matter whether you like it or whether you don't.
That's true.
And oftentimes it's hard, right, Brother Brian? It's hard. History and the struggle is hard. But we don't revisit history to judge people. We don't revisit history to condemn people. We don't revisit history to make people angry. That's not what history is about. I think we do a disservice when we do that. We revisit history for the sake of knowledge and wisdom, so that we take that knowledge and wisdom and make it transformative. We become intentional about using that history to propel us to a greater, brighter future in whatever way that is. If it means not repeating history, that propels us. If it means repeating some of the great things that we lost and we stopped doing, that whatever that is that's transformative, that's the great part of history that we have to keep doing. And unfortunately today, I think we're not doing all facets of that. We're just looking back. We're just recounting speeches. And so I think we do him a disservice. I think we dishonor the memory of the legacy of the movement. We have to look at it in eyes of action. What do we continue doing today? And what's going to be our legacy today as we keep moving forward?
I think we have to reach out and love each other. We have to love all the kids in the community. And you know, there's good and bad everywhere. People make mistakes, but you got to reach out. These kids, this one or that one, you don't know. They could have the cure to cancer in their head. You know, they could have the cure to food shortage. You don't know. All these kids need to get the best education. And one thing that used to kill me is when I look back at the historical stuff, is whenever a parent told a kid they couldn't do something, and it's like, why would you tell your child that? If my child said they wanted to be whatever, I'm gonna say, yeah, go for it. Unless there's something like an astronaut and your vision is 2040, you can do it, right? You tell them they can do it. You push them, you push them, you push them. That's how some of these people have done things they have done. And you want to make their self-esteem, because everybody doesn't come from the same household. And you want to push the love for all the kids, not just the ones in your street, not just the ones in your family, but all the kids. You love all of them. And the ones on the west side and the ones on the east side. And all of us need to get together and focus on making this world a better place. Go ahead.
I think, Renee, you hit on something. What was the statement? Any people who don't know your history cannot appreciate your present and have no sense of direction for your future. You got to know where you've been in order to appreciate where you are. But where you are ought to be a motivation to where you want to go. And there must be that constant striving. There must be that constant educating of our people. One of the things that I'm really concerned in our community is that we've got to keep, at least go back to educating our young people as to their who-ness and whose-ness, and help them to understand that they don't belong just to themselves. They belong. I grew up in ancient history, to both of you all. When I grew up, you were the property of the whole community. And people said to you, you represent my future. you represent my hope. You can be more than where we are now. And I think that's the thing that keeps many of us going. We grew up in a time that's a lot different from where we're. I knew nothing about, I was 10, 11, 12 years old before we had a television. But nobody else in the community had one either. We were poor, not poor. We couldn't afford the ORA. but nobody in the community knew that we were poor because everybody else was in the same shape. But what we learned to do was the point you were making is we learned to share. We learned to help each other. And we learned that community meant so much to us. And Martin's book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, has to speak to us anew. That if we don't understand that we're working about building the beloved community, then we're going to have a chaotic situation on our hands. And we really got to work at that.
And just like too, as a parent, a lot of times parents make the mistake and they only fuss at the child when they do bad, fuss at the child when they mess up, and they never pat them on the back and give them a hug when they do well. And we should do that with all the kids. We all holler when something's going down wrong, but when the kids are doing well, make a big deal out of it. Put your arms around them and tell them you're proud of them. They don't have to be your child because all the children are your child.
Life is hard, Brown. People are struggling, and it's difficult.
Yeah.
There are many parents right now, as simple as that may sound for you and I, they're in a place right now where every day is a struggle. And so we have to be careful about how we look at people and what they should or shouldn't be doing. So I always say, it's just me. What am I doing? How can I be better? How can I help someone along the way? Village concept has always been important to the African American community. We always believed it took a village to raise the kids. I still believe that. I still believe that it's the wholeness of the community. We're in challenging times right now. To say that we're where we should be, to say that 50 years ago that Dr. King would say, wow, if he were still here where we are, I don't know what he would think about where we are. I know this. It's hard. There's some hard issues. There's some challenges. There's some injustices, some inequalities. Every day we're still facing. We're still fighting the battle. It looks different today than it did yesterday, but it's still a struggle. And we've still got work to do.
You're right. And I was at a meeting downtown, and the lady in Farragut, I should say her name on here, but she was at the meeting. She wanted to let them know that she was in a situation in Farragut. I don't know if she lives out there, but she was out in Farragut, and this guy was waving a gun at her for 20 minutes, just trying to be funny. And she called on the radio, and she said, on the phone, and she said, 911, I got this guy, and he's pointing a gun at my face, and I need you guys to come get me. And she said, I'm a black woman, and he's a white guy, and so you can tell who I am, so you can find us quicker, and da-da-da-da-da. And she said, 45 minutes later, hour and a half, they never came. And so she came to the meeting to let them know that, what she got to do is say it's a white woman being chased by a black guy before the police are going to come. And she's got their attention from that. But it's just going to let you know still that we still have problems and people still dealing with it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No worries. 1936. Victor Green wrote a book called The Green Negro Motorist Book. He wrote that book, and in the beginning he said, I truly hope I'm starting a business that will one day be out of business, that will never need a book like this before. Part of that book was during a period of time where African Americans began to own their own cars. They began to drive, go to different places, and this book was a guidebook, so that as they traveled, they would know where they could go and where they could stop, because there were many places African Americans could not stop at. In addition, you could map out where you were going, because you don't want to run out of gas, for example, driving with your family at night, or any time for that matter, it was very dangerous. So African Americans needed to know where they could stop and be able to be assisted. 1936.
Or use the
And
restroom or in the restaurant or anything.
all of those things.
Yeah.
But in his own way, at the very beginning of the book, he listed all of these things. And it said, when you're driving, don't go too fast. Don't weave. Don't cross the center line. Just stay straight on the road. Don't pass another car. In other words, in a real underlying manner, he was saying, don't do anything to get pulled over by the police officers, because it could be very dangerous for an African American to be pulled over. 1936, that went to 1964. Here we are in 2018, and we are still having the same conversation about the rules of the road so that you make it back home safely. That book was written in 1936 and in 1964, and he said, I hope I'm writing a book that'll never be needed again, because there ought to come a day and time when you shouldn't have to worry about whether your car stops, where you get pulled over, where there's a place to go. And why are we still having this conversation in 2018? We are, because we don't know history. Nothing new under the sun. Everything that's happened has already happened before. So some of these same issues that we're addressing in 2018, we've already visited those, but because we don't know history, we keep repeating some of the horrors of the things we've already been through.
Yeah.
Well, folks, as you can see, this topic tonight has been about the 50th anniversary, what happened to Dr. King. We were talking about what he stood for. We're talking about what you should take from this, what you want to remember. Each one of us has responsibility to try to do something to make it better. This was 50 years ago when King was killed trying to help the sanitation workers. And what have you done? What have you personally done to make this world a better place? You know, you don't have to have a whole lot of money. You don't have to have a whole lot of nothing. Sometimes it's just a matter of putting your arm around somebody and help them do whatever they're trying to do. But what I want to remember from this is that Dr. King was for everybody. He just wasn't for the black folks. He was for all people, and the children to get along with each other and not see color anymore, and it not be a problem. And we still got to work on that. But we got problems around. We just have to keep doing what you can do. Everybody doesn't have the same skills. Everybody doesn't come from the same household, but we all can do something. And remember on May 1st to vote, and your vote counts. Don't worry about what people tell you. Every election is important. A lot of people only vote on the presidential election. Every election is important. And I'm going to tell you, these commissioners downtown and the city council, that election is more important than the one in D.C., okay? Now, you got to get out there and vote. Know who to go to get help. Know where to go to on the website. Go to the Democratic headquarters. Go to one of your friends. You know, it's just, Beck's Cultural Center has nothing to do with the political stuff. They're just about history. Pastor Middlebrook is the representative of the Democratic Party for District 1. Okay, right. So he's involved with a lot of this stuff. I used to be. And now I just go out and try to register people to vote sometimes. And I tell people that you got this available and that available. And please remember that your vote does count. Now we're down to the wire.
Not only register, but vote.
You heard it.
That's key important. And if you don't vote, don't squawk.
I hear you. And April 15th?
Yes, it's at the Tennessee Theater. Doors open at 2:30. Beck Culture Exchange Center, the Knoxville Area Urban League, and the Tennessee Theater. You're welcome to be our guest for the screening of To Kill a Mockingbird as we continue the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Dr. King and 55th anniversary of when the Tennessee Theater was open to African Americans, which is a significant date because we weren't always able to go there. We were 50 years ago, we were having that.
Thank you very much.